people will be like, you sent me a link, like I'm not going to open the link. They've done that to me over LinkedIn, and I always kind of fall back on more than welcome to not open it. I'm happy to tell you about the video or what was in it. Or sometimes I'll try and just validate myself and make sure they know that I'm from a security and compliance company of utmost importance to me, that I operate within those guidelines as well.
That's Stone Gomez. He's a top performing SDR at Drata. He crushed it with 150% in Q1. He did it again in June with 150%, and yep, hit 100% more than once. In today's episode with Stone, we're going to talk about the sequence he's currently using, how he crafts his messaging, and finally, we'll talk also about how to prospect the security buyer personas. Stone, how many sequences do you use, and how long are those sequences?
On any given day, I'm using from 6 to, I'd say, 12 sequences.
Okay.
And they all vary just depending upon, the types of companies I'm going after, personas. Sometimes I use engaged sequences. Um, and then for as many steps as there is, they also range anywhere from 6 to 14 steps typically.
When you say steps, are you thinking about anything from cold emails, cold calls, and LinkedIn touches or social touches?
Within those sequences, there's almost always a LinkedIn touch, almost always a cold call touch if they have a good number. Sometimes there's places in there where I'll send like GIFs for bumps to messages.
Uh-huh.
Um, and there's also places in a lot of those sequences where if I'm getting good engagement on those emails, I'll actually send like a personalized video over to the prospect as well.
Okay. And you said that you have between 6 and 15 touches. So how many days can you run a sequence? Is it like 15 days to 28 days or?
I want to say they're typically around the 15 to like 24,
Okay.
24 days. Yeah.
And you started to talk about that also. So you said that you have like different sequences you could use between 6 to 12. So how you're thinking about sequences, you started to mention the size of the company, but also buyer personas.
Correct. So there's a couple of different things. First thing that I'm always keeping in mind is, in the company I work for, Drata, us being security and compliance, companies will oftentimes have different frameworks, compliance frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 27001. So if a company has those frameworks, I will put them into a sequence that is speaking directly to them having it, versus if I come across a company where I can't find any of those frameworks in place, I'll have a sequence that is more geared towards messaging that makes sense for them not having a framework in place yet. I also am, like you mentioned, am looking to see, okay, how big is this company? Is it 50 people? Is it 100? 100 have different sequences to cater towards that. And that's because, companies that are 5 to 10 people are going through different stages and experiencing different pains than a company that is 150 people. So that's something I will vary for the sequences. And then also personas. So if I want to be more specific just around the type of persona that I'm speaking to or targeting, then I have an array of persona type sequences that I'll use as well.
I have a few questions here. So you mentioned that you have sequences depending on if they have the SOC 2 framework, for example, or if they don't. How
Mhm.
do you know that, for example?
Sometimes it's actually pretty easy. Like if when companies go through a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001 audit, it's something worth sharing and putting on their website. So a lot of times you'll
Okay.
just find it at the very bottom of the website, and it'll be in the form of like a little badge. Other times you'll just click, like at the bottom of the websites also where they have like about sections. A lot of companies will have a security page or a trust center, and that's where you can go and see these certain frameworks that they comply with.
And if they have it, for example, it means that they have a competitor of you, or is it, or they are doing it on their own? Or so what's the?
That's that's where a little bit of the mystery lies.
Okay.
There's sometimes if they have used one of our competitors, the badge might actually say the name of the company they
Okay.
used. More often than not, it's a very standard badge that will say SOC 2 or ISO 27001, and you don't know like how they achieved that, who they achieved it with.
Yeah.
So that's where trying to dig in the messaging, or if you get them on the phone, trying to figure out, how they were able to achieve it.
So also you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned the size of the company. So you said that depending on the size of the companies, they have different pains.
Mhm.
With SOC 2, for example. So can you give some examples of pains that a company with 10 employees will have that you can help with, and a company with 100 employees, for example?
Companies that I mean, when I was first starting at Drata, I was working a lot of companies that were 5 to 10 employees, sometimes a little bit more than that, and the way I kind of think of it is these companies are naturally progressing where they're releasing products, they're having to make a decision to go acquire some type of solution for their security compliance because they don't have anything yet. And so their pain point is we just don't have anything. Like we want to get started on going after a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001. We're not sure where to begin. And this is where we come into the conversation and help guide them towards, SOC 2 or ISO, whatever they plan on going after. Whereas a company that's 150 employees likely has some type of processes in place already for their security and compliance. If not, they already have a solution that they're utilizing, but maybe they're still having to undergo like a lot of manual work. Um, Security and compliance is eating up a lot of their time and resources throughout the year, or they have a very difficult audit process. And that's where we come in, and it's instead of being a choice for them because they have to move forward, it's okay, take a look at our solution versus what you've been using, and maybe it's a better solution to maintain compliance year over year.
So I imagine, for example, with those that they're already aware of using it, it's more like, hey, there is maybe a better solution to achieve what you are looking for.
Exactly. Like they
Mhm.
often, they like what they have in place, or they feel that their processes are doing a good job. And, a lot of the time they are. But there's new methods out there and new solutions that are uh, leveraging a lot of automation. And when they see that or get a chance to look at it, they're like, oh, there is a better way to do this that can save me a lot of time.
And so I remember when we were preparing the episode together, so you mentioned that I think you are prospecting up to 500 employees, something like that. Or what's the maximum?
Correct.
Correct? Yeah,
Yeah, so I'm 50 to 500 employees
5,500.
is the
Okay.
range that I work within.
And do you see a difference with a company? I imagine yes, but do you have a differences, different pains with a company with 500 employees, for example? Or what are the common pains?
Companies that are, 500 employees, oftentimes it's some more of like the remedial stuff. So, for instance, like onboarding employees becomes like a large task for those big companies. Just managing uh, employee compliance can be a big task for for those companies. Whereas with a company that's 5 to 10 people, that's pretty quick and easy thing to track, easy thing to do. Um, and the pains are around audit time for those larger companies can also be really tough because it's a big process to get all of their data and get everything ready for the audit. There is quite a bit of difference in the way that I approach
Yeah.
accounts, depending on size, even from that 50 to 500 is pretty different.
And right now we were talking about the size of the company. How do you approach now the your buyer personas? Because I imagine you have different buyer personas depending on the size of the company, but do you have like a different messaging also depending on the size of the company, or how are you thinking about that?
For buyer personas, say for instance, like a 5 to 10 person company CEO, because they can be a buyer
Yeah.
persona for our product. Um, they're probably having to see some bit of security and compliance. They're probably having to work on that because of the size of their company. They just take on more than what the typical CEO would. Whereas with these larger companies, it doesn't make sense for me to go talk to a CEO because
Yeah.
they're not going to be experiencing those pain points. So I, and also when you get to these larger companies, even 50 employees to the 500 range for security and compliance, there's very specific roles for uh, those processes.
Mhm.
So oftentimes engineers or chief information security officers, chief technology officers, those are more the people that I'm going after. And while you can find them sometimes in the smaller companies, more often than not, you're going to see them in, the bigger companies overseeing a lot more of the security compliance initiatives.
Then also I had other question around the sequences. So we mentioned that you have based on the size of the company, buyer personas, but also if they use the SOC 2 framework or the framework. So do you use other criteria to create sequences?
It's mostly, I mean, the criteria is really is mostly based on uh, persona, size of the company, if the frameworks they have, and then
Mm,
also if I'm aware that they are using a competitor or
okay.
just another solution in the space, I have sequences that are geared towards that as well.
So I think what I really like in what you mentioned about your sequences, it's you're really focused on being relevant
Hmm.
to your to your prospects, and you try to go really deep on to the pain they are facing based on the size of the company. Like you mentioned, that a CEO of a 10-person company, for example, is not going to have the same pain as a company with 500, and you are not going to talk to a CEO. And I think that's really good because it's you show that you know them, and imagine if we are talking about the messaging, so in general, so it's going to you are going to show that in on your LinkedIn messages, but also on your emails and obviously on the phone. So and imagine those conversations are easier to have with your prospect because they know that they know that you know them.
Exactly. And I mean, they've gotten easier over time now that I've been here for a little
Yeah.
over a year, but honestly, getting to know our customer stories, reading our case studies that we have, which our team does a really good job on, that's been a huge help to understanding, the different pains and different experiences from varying sizes of companies,
Yeah.
different personas. Um, and now they're so ingrained with me that after listening to those and reading them so often and using them so often that when I get on the phones, I can just kind of take a look and see who I'm calling and understand, okay, I need to change what I'm going to speak to based on, their role in the
Yeah.
company pretty quickly.
In your messaging, do you focus on the pain or also the results that you can give them?
I think there's a little bit of both.
Mhm.
And I think in our sequences, we try to, we're really trying to uncover the pain more
Okay.
so than demonstrating, the value we can provide. We will touch on the value we provide a little bit, but
Yeah.
don't want it to come across as pitchy. And more than anything, we're interested in learning about these businesses and learning about how they're operating. So
Yeah.
sometimes we will have, or I will have parts of my sequence where I might touch on a case study and show a little bit of that value. And those case studies and those sequences are tied to, the size of the company or the persona. So it's usually, I try to be as relevant as possible so that it actually resonates with them. But
Mhm.
most of the time, I'm trying to really uncover the pain first and foremost.
Yeah. When tailoring messages based on company size, is there a particular aha moment or realization that shift the way you approach different companies?
Mhm.
And what's the story behind that?
When I first started at Drata, it was kind of free for all. You could go after whatever accounts you wanted to. We weren't segmented. And I noticed, I'd be working in pe- a lot of accounts that were 5 to 10 people. And then I'm like, oh, I've got a 800-person company that I'm trying to break into. And I'd get somebody on the phone. And my typical talk track was just, it wasn't working. It wasn't resonating. And so I spent time going through our case studies. And it was kind of an aha moment when I realized, like, there is just such a difference. Like these people are really experiencing different things, depending upon the size of the company. I think that aha moment really was like on the too when I was having cold calls. Like I
Mhm.
just couldn't approach cold calls the same. And once we got segmented and I got put into the commercial space, I realized that I had to find a way to approach these conversations differently because what I was using for these smaller companies, the 5 to 10 people, it wasn't going to transition into meetings in the commercial space. With those smaller companies, it was a good deal easier to get a conversation started kind of quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas now I feel like I'm almost doing anything that I can to just get any type of conversation started with. anybody that can give me a possible lead. And I'm typically having 2, 3, 4 conversations with maybe even different people prior to me booking a meeting. And that's, I think, pretty normal for these larger size companies. Like you just have to try and get little bits of information anywhere that you can.
Also for the listeners, so you mentioned commercial. So commercial, they are the companies between 50 and 500 employees at Drata. So
Hmm.
for me, in my previous role, generally they were calling this segment mid-market, but
Hmm.
yeah, just want to clarify that. The
Yeah, that's mid. We refer to them as mid market. I think when we segmented, we wanted to just put a stamp on it, say these will be commercial.
yeah.
So yeah, very similar though.
Now, because we are still on the sequences, so diving
Mhm.
deeper into sequences, can you share a surprising A/B tests you've conducted based on the company size and what the outcomes taught you?
Yeah. So some A/B testing I've done is I was, for instance, working on companies because I can break them out in my account views, so I can see, okay, these are the accounts that I have that are 50 to 100, and these are some that are 100 to 200. And I would spend time using the same sequence on those accounts for both of them,
Uh-huh.
and I would find that I was getting more conversations started with the smaller size accounts based on that messaging that I had, and I think it was just because I was more targeted towards the pain points that was most experienced with.
Yeah.
And so what I ended up having to do is I would go and still use parts of the same sequence, but I redrafted templates that I would interchange to go after those larger size companies. Um, Especially something, and this is also because for companies that are 100, 200 plus people, it's pretty safe to assume they have a security and compliance posture in place. They have processes. They might even have a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001 that they're just not showing to the public. But if you send messages to them where it's like, I don't see that you have anything in place, it's kind of insulting. And so
Yeah.
when I started working those larger size companies, I kind of had to come up with some messaging that was vague, isn't the right word, but I think had more just under the umbrella. Like I recognize that you all have something in place. I just don't know what it is yet.
And I know right now you have been there for more than 1 year. So if we're still talking about sequences, so what's next? What do you think you can improve on your current process with sequences?
LinkedIn is something that I would like to be better about
Okay.
while I use it. I message people on there. I personalize messages on there. I spend a good amount of time on it.
Yeah.
I am not what you would consider to be like a social seller, where I'm
Mhm.
not creating posts every day. That's an area that I would like to improve on, just so that if somebody stumbles upon my profile,
Yeah.
they can very easily see what I help with and what that looks like. Um, Also, I have, I think in these larger size companies, um, just hyper personalization, I think is
Mhm.
crucial, especially
Yeah.
as Drata matures and grows. In order to break into accounts and to get conversations started with the people that you really want to speak with,
Uh-huh.
having that really good personalized touch is important. And while I've really focused on personalization based on the personas and the industry that they're in, company size, I know that I need to spend more time hyper
Yeah.
personalizing.
I have a question for you for social selling. I have a different question, but let's start with social selling. Did you try to post a bit about Drata on LinkedIn or for trying to what you have in mind to test on LinkedIn? What do you have in mind?
Yeah, I think like for instance, it's kind of piggybacking off of some of the
Yeah,
work our team already does, but we have such great resources. There's so many good blog posts,
yeah,
so many good case studies that are put up already. I use those all the time to create templates for myself and to create information that I'll send out for follow-ups with people or prospects. And I think an easy thing to do would just be to go utilize those resources and post about them on LinkedIn a little bit. It
okay.
doesn't have to be totally original content, but I would like to have some original content sprinkled in there as well.
Yeah, I was asking that because social selling, I think I've made at least 6 episodes on social selling, talking
Mhm,
with top performing SDRs from different industries also. I think there is different things. The majority they are posting on LinkedIn, generally they have like a buyer persona, they have salespeople or marketing people. And I think it makes sense because you can relate to the job. And so it's more genuine, I would say, when they're posting. But
mhm,
then the rest, I know different people, they are prospecting LinkedIn, but they don't post at all because, for example, I tried it also. Right now, I'm working with engineers, data leaders. So they are for me engineers, but
mhm,
I tried to post on LinkedIn. So I don't think I've tried enough, obviously. But what I found really useful with them is to, yeah, go talk to them and
mhm.
pitching. I'm not saying pitching, the pitch lab. So sending like a 20 lines paragraph to talk about what we are doing, but more like a 4 to 8 lines, depending on if I find something about them. And
Yeah,
because this week I was reading a post from Florin that I've interviewed on the show. Is really good at social selling, and he was mentioning that engineers are not responding to prospecting messages on LinkedIn, and that's something I found that yes, they do, but when you're reaching to sales leaders, generally, sales leaders they don't like to be pitched. But
mhm,
engineers, for example, you can pitch them because they don't go on LinkedIn often. Obviously, you are not going to be really having like a long format, but you need to personalize, obviously. But
mhm.
they are going to respond positively because it's if it's done in a good way. I think that's something that can work. Uh,
I totally agree, and that's something, selling to security leaders,
I imagine.
they, it's not I would say it's not common for them to have very, like, robust LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah,
They're not gonna have super long about sections where they're talking about a lot about their lives and, their interests. Usually, they're pretty cut and dry. So
yeah,
for the hyper personalizing, sometimes that makes it tough because it's like, where do I go to, find things? A lot of times there's not much I can find. So that's why I personalize so
yeah.
much. And I've actually engineers feel pain from security and compliance initiatives and efforts a lot. So I've reached out to them, and like you mentioned, it's while pitch might not be like the best term for it,
No, yeah,
it's something I've used and had good success with over LinkedIn, and it was just a short message where
exactly.
I touch a little bit about the value we provide and some of our customers that have seen it, and as short as I can get it, and I've seen
Yeah.
good success with that.
Yeah, exactly. I think LinkedIn it's really similar to email, but shorter than emails because it's
Hmm.
like a conversation. Also, like you mentioned, I think security leader is pretty similar. They're not going to LinkedIn often, so that's it's not like you don't want to build relationship with them, but if they're going once a week or maybe one every 2 weeks, if you try to build relationship, it's not going to work because they might receive like 50 other messages. So you need to go straight to the point. And for example, I have a story about a prospect that I booked at my current role. The guy said yes to a meeting and then he ghosted me
Hmm.
for a month. And then a month later, he replied, say, "Oh, sorry, I just go back on LinkedIn today. So sorry about that." So because I'm not spending that time on LinkedIn, and for us, it sounds like we are thinking that our prospects are the same, but I think there is different buyer persona that are not spending time on LinkedIn. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, LinkedIn is a very necessary part of my life, and I think a
exactly.
lot of other sales um, leaders' lives. But when you're in some of these other roles, it's something that you have when you need it. And it's, I can tell that, a lot of people that I try to reach out to are on there maybe once a month.
Yeah.
So I try to get something out there instead of just a, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. And the other thing you were mentioning is hyper personalization. So what do you have in mind for hyper personalization with those larger accounts?
really what that looks like to me and, our team is if I find potential customer, somebody that I really want to start a conversation with, I'm checking any resources they've posted on LinkedIn, their
Yeah.
about section, trying to find something personal about them that I can, you know, see if maybe it even resonates with me. I have some type of connection to it. And I'm just including that in my first message to them and then
Okay.
trying to tie it back into, our values and our uh, and what we can help with. So just trying to get something where they see that, I took time, that I actually
Yeah.
care about the message I'm sending.
I try to do the same with those engineers leaders, and like you mentioned earlier, it's really tough to find something about them to personalize on. So generally, what I'm trying to do is, if I find an interview, for example, from one of the
Mm.
executive team, I'm going to use that and leverage that with the rest of the team. So I don't need to spend too much time looking for something I'm not going to find. So and it's relevant for all of them because if they are talking about, I don't know, a specific pain about the business, you know
Mhm.
that they're going to face the same pain. So I think that's something that really helped me to accelerate my process because, like you said, the buyer personas we are going after, sometimes they are not reactive on LinkedIn or they are not going to share a lot of things. So it's but you can spend 30 seconds and you know you're not going to find anything.
There was a time when, um, it was 2 quarters ago when we,
Uh-huh.
were really making a push towards personalization, and I was spending way too much time on each person
Yeah,
that I was trying to prospect. So I had to find a way to get quicker with it, and personalizing, and then personalizing based off of, like you said, some information I could find out about the business.
yeah,
Is kind of the direction I took. When I find those gems on LinkedIn where, oh my gosh, this person has a good about section, like it's awesome because it makes it easy. But
obviously. Yeah.
it's yeah.
You mentioned a few times security. In fact, you are going after security buyer personas. So could you give some examples about what you need to think about with security buyer personas when you're reaching out?
What I'm really looking for is if I can find that they are in charge of, any of the oversight of the compliance frameworks
Yeah.
that I was mentioning. That's something that is awesome if I can find. There's not really anything that c- I would see that would make me steer clear from them.
Mhm.
I have found that even though they're security leaders, they're still opening emails, they're still willing to
Yeah.
engage and talk. Um, but sometimes you will interact with ones that are very like will opt out immediately or tell you to take them off their call list like immediately. Um, as far as like things that I'm looking for, it really is just their roles like CTOs,
Yeah.
CISOs, chief information officers. A lot of the times you'll come across either engineers that in their responsibilities, you'll see that they actually have some security responsibilities with frameworks or they're overseeing certain projects. I've even seen project managers handle
Okay.
some stuff because they are project manager and SOC 2 or ISO 27001 becomes a project for teams. Um, so yeah, anything that aligns with, the the umbrella of security and compliance. I'm just trying to check in their responsibilities.
I was curious also about the links, for example, because I know security leaders are more careful about links. And so, do you use any links with them or at any point on your sequences? Or
Yeah, we do. I I've tried, uh, for instance, a CTO specific sequence where I'm calling out CTO specific pains, and I even have a video that I made for CTOs,
Mhm.
and that was included in the first step. And I noticed I was getting less engagement. I think those emails were going to spam. Um,
Okay.
but typically, we are trying to keep our links till later in the sequence because once they've opened up that first email, second email, I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I think Gmail or whatever,
Yeah.
email provider they have recognizes that it's not spam and it'll come through. Um, I have had people be like, you sent me a link, like I'm not going to open the link. And they've done that to me over LinkedIn, and I always kind of fall back on more than welcome to not open it. I'm happy to tell you about the video or what was in it.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll try and just validate myself and make sure they know that I'm from a security and compliance company and that it's of utmost importance to me that I operate within those guidelines as well. So, but most of the time they're open to looking at things and open to opening things, which I was kind of surprised at um, when I first started.
When you move the further links, for example, onto the third touch? Because you mentioned that when you're trying on your first touch, you saw that you had a really low open rate. So did you see any changes after doing this change?
Yeah, I did.
Improvement? Mhm.
I noticed that, and a lot of times on, for instance, one of our touches is we'll have a video, personalized video, and I can actually see the percentage of the video that was watched,
Yeah.
which is really awesome. And I noticed that they get opened a lot, and it did improve. It did help to have those links later on. Having them early in the sequence will you'll find yourself in spam.
Yeah. So I think spam features, they are changing a lot. And this year is going to, they're getting harder,
Hmm.
spam features. So that's something you need to be really careful about. But I think, like you mentioned, it's the link on the first email. Generally, that's something you want to avoid, because with small companies, generally, they don't have that much that issue because they don't have like a lot of spam features. But the bigger the companies and they have way more spam features. So
Hmm.
uh, every link or image that you have in your emails, for example, they are not going to get through because of that.
Exactly. For instance,
So
even on my
yeah,
signature link, I had like booking links and links in my signature that I had to remove because those were also keeping me from getting through as well.
yeah, and that's something. The signature, that's something seen for this year. I was focusing a lot on enterprise accounts, so companies with more than 1,000 employees, and that's something I removed completely from my signature. Don't have any links or pictures because of that. Even with that, for example, I have one account Slack. That was one of my accounts. That's one of my accounts, and I know that right now I'm getting into spam because I don't get any opens on my email anymore. But at the beginning, I got like 3 or 4 opens on it. But now I don't have like any opens because I imagine someone flagged me as spam and that's over.
Yep. Yeah. It's
So
it's always such a bummer to see.
yeah, but that's the way it is. But there is other channels, so no worries.
Exactly.
So Stone, we are at the end of the episode. So still have a few more questions for you. So
Mhm.
if there was one piece of advice for SDRs looking to improve their prospecting efforts, what would that be? And one piece of advice they should ignore.
Slow down to speed up.
Okay.
Take your time. Be intentional. Volume can only get you so far. So slowing down to speed up, really taking the time to find good leads, put people into the right sequence, get the right message over to them the first time is crucial. And also be creative. Don't be afraid to try something new. Um, Go create new sequences, new templates, snippets, make videos. But also don't do a complete overhaul of your process. Maybe try one new thing at a time.
Yeah.
And for something to avoid, piece of advice to avoid, there's so many voices out there, so many people on LinkedIn. I think while it's great to take inspiration and listen to others, it's really important to build your own compass and to, you know, find your o- find your own voice and to listen to yourself. So listen to others, listen to those on your team that are doing well, but don't try and take all of someone's way of thinking or try and do things the exact same way somebody else is doing them because it's just difficult. You got to find a way to, go down your own path.
Well, Stone, thank you so much for everything today, for your time. So, but before we end the episode, do you have anything else you want to share with the listeners?
I don't have anything on the top of my mind, but I really appreciate your time, Elric, and for reaching out and having me on. Look forward to speaking with you in the future.
Well, Stone, thank you so much. And for everyone listening, thanks for listening to this episode, and I see you on the next one.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So for Spotify, to leave a review, what you can do is you can use your phone, then go on the Spotify app, then you go to the SDR game page, and then at the top of the page, you can leave a review. It's a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode, obviously. And then if you are listening to this episode on Apple Podcasts, feel free also to leave a review on your app. Thanks for listening, and I see you on the next episode.